Good Vach, Shvur Tov to everyone, and hope you had a wonderful Shabbos. Just adding a repeat of that for those who have joined in the last few minutes. It's been a week like no other that I can remember in our community, and all of our thoughts have been with Elaine, Joshua, Dina, Gila and their families, and Rabbi Sacks' brothers who are now all back in Israel. Motzei Shabbos is not a time for a hesped, a eulogy, and anyway, Many of you will have had a chance to see mine, and everyone I'm sure has watched Gila's magnificent tribute to her father just before the burial on Sunday. The Shiva for Rabbi Lord Sacks Zechesad Livrocha ended today, and we wanted to give our community the first of what I hope will be many opportunities to find ways to celebrate Rabbi Lord Sacks' life. But for us particularly within the community of which he was once rabbi, and for the past 7 years, its most well-known congregant. So tonight, we're putting this brief early tribute on the limitations, of course, of the current situation of the lockdown has made it very tough and complex, even for those closest to Rabbi Sacks, his family, his office, Joanna, Dan and Debbie, who may be watching. But it also provided no real opportunity for our community, his community, to engage with our feelings of loss. Of course, in ordinary circumstances, there would have been a huge Dunstan Road turnout at the funeral and at the Shiva, but due to the current circumstances, sadly, that hasn't been possible. There are going to be lots of United Synagogue and other communal events coming soon, but a brief thought, given that we had not been able to be in shul together this week either, and an informal opportunity to begin to remember Rabbi Lord Sacks as a community. Now, one didn't need to be a member of Golders Green Synagogue to know that Rabbi Lord Sacks was a figure with international reach, a towering intellect, the most influential rabbinic thinker of an era, and certainly the rabbi with the largest reach in his lifetime, probably in history. One only has to read the extraordinary tributes, obituaries, remarks online, offline, in newspapers from global leaders, heads of faiths, politicians, and even opponents to see what an extraordinary figure he was and that the world is mourning with the Sacks family. You didn't have to know him to see that he was a great thinker, a moral philosopher, and a spiritual leader. When one met him, you also saw that he was a remarkable, what I used a phrase in the Hesped, which was an extraordinary, enormous privilege and awesome responsibility to give, what I called a courageous mensch, which I think encapsulates, if one can encapsulate a great man just in a couple of words, a courageous mensch. But for us, he was also a shul member no one can quite believe, who didn't actually have his own seat. He time-shared his seat with Peter in a way which actually suited them both very well. And it's just how it worked out at the time when they arrived back in August 2013. But it was an arrangement which everyone will remember, but actually worked very well for Rabbi Lord Sacks and for Peter too. It was always a tremendous pleasure to see Rabbi Lord Sacks in a kind of relaxed environment, whether it was with his grandchildren, other kids in school, in the shul. Lots of people will remember Rachel Rosa Verber running around, who seemed to have kind of adopted him as a sort of surrogate present grandfather. And his accessibility at the Kiddush. I rather feel that members of the public who at this stage in his career who want to get hold of him or speak to him may find it rather difficult. But actually, he made himself accessible. People spoke to him in the Kiddush, chatted to him, had access to the greatest Jewish mind of a generation, just over a whiskey or a piece of herring. And visitors often were absolutely in awe. They didn't know it was okay to go and approach him, but he was, in this setting within his community, a most approachable person. On a personal note, we often were able to exchange ideas, not just at shul, but often between aliyahs at appropriate moments and probably occasionally inappropriate moments during the davening. He was always checking what I'm reading. This is what he wanted. What are you reading? We would share ideas, books. And on one occasion, you might remember, I think 3 years ago, rather unfortunately for me, we also shared a Rosh Hashanah drasha. you may remember what happened. And I made a rule that from May, I never recommend a book to Rabbi Sacks, nor accept a book recommendation, because of the prospect of a repeat of this. I'd written my sermon, and he published his sermon the day before, and it was identical to what I'd been planning to say. And we got past it, but until that point, I had thought there was no downside at all to having him in our community. I just want to just reflect on one or two occasions. I was thinking today that there is a vase, which you can't see, it's off, so which we have in our house, which Vicky particularly dislikes. I rather like it. And the Sackses were here once, and Rabbi Sacks managed to knock it off its perch. And I could see Vicky smile until he caught it before it hit the floor. And so I'm looking at this vase now, thinking this is going to be a kind of Jonathan memorial vase now, and I hope it stays the distance because I really like it. While there will be many other occasions of personal reflection, there's one thing that I do want to say, which it's unlikely here anyone knows about, which is that during the lockdown period, the extended lockdown, which was about 16 weeks during the summer when the shul was closed and life was really turned upside down in a way that it is a little now, but it's really not quite the same as it was then. There's an interesting question. Many rabbis, leaders were called on to provide a level of support. And not that many people were wondering so much how the rabbis are doing. The question, who cares for the carers? I counted. Rabbi Sacks phoned me 9 times during the lockdown period, pretty much every 2 weeks or even more frequently, to ask, how's it going? What's going on with the shul? I'm following what's happening to make sure that you're doing well, and so on. So if they want to ask the question, who cares for the carers? I may have been the Sacks family rabbi, that enormous privilege for the last 7 years, but during the lockdown period, it was Rabbi Sacks who was worrying about me and how I was doing, to making sure that we were feeling okay in our attempt to look after the community too. And for that, I will be eternally grateful. One further thought before we move to the next part of the programme, and it's somewhat based on what Gila said in her remarkable hesper for her father on Sunday. He was a person who was able to empower others to be leaders, but to be themselves. And I think that there is a correlation, and someone wrote to me to say this during the week. There is a correlation between the extraordinary development of our community, its growth, certainly at the young end, the change that we've gone through in the last 7 years. I think there is a correlation between the Sacks' presence, Rabbi Lord Sacks, Tibod L'chaim Arukim, and Elaine, their presence in the community, and particularly Rabbi Sacks' empowering of me to kind of be myself, do my own thing, branch in different directions, often encouraging my non-conformity. And I think that those things have been tremendously valuable to me, and I hope, by extension, to the community. And I would also like to think, as I come to the end of this, that we rubbed off a little on him too. We will always think of him, and I hope there are going to be many more formal and informal opportunities for our community to remember him. I'm sure there will be. But for now, and this is all I wanted to share with you, a few personal thoughts this evening, and I'm handing over to Joel for the next part of the programme. Thank you.
So we're going to show 2 extracts from the centenary conversation, which took place in December 2015. And as anyone who was there, was an extremely special occasion, a conversation between Rabbi Lord Sacks and Professor Simon Sharma, in which Rabbi Sacks was the interviewer, but obviously gave a lot of himself as well. So we'll show the first extract, and then a few photos of Rabbi Sacks' time in the community spanning several generations, and then a second extract.
What do you see as the future for our children's generation as Jews in Europe?
Always the easy questions from a Jewish audience. Look, again, to just remember a scene in the mayhem, and I hope this still exists. Remember when Benjamin Netanyahu went to the great synagogue in Paris and wanted and made a drasha about how all the French community should pack its bags and, make aliyah sort of the next day. And the community, that was after the kosher supermarket and Charlie Hebdo murders. and the community responded by singing the Marseillaise. Obviously, I don't see it as, and I don't want it to be the beginning of the end of Jewish life in Europe. I love, the long history, the richness, the beauty of, if we have I would rather fight anti-Semitism as loudly, as clearly, as urgently, and as adamantly as we can. Because for all the kind of, the horrible morphing of anti-Zionism into anti-Semitism, which is a problem, and we're seeing overwhelmingly in France, but you get the occasional bad smell here too, when cowards or people panic-stricken take Israeli goods off the shelves of supermarkets, or the dreadful boycotts. We're called on to fight that, because there are countless people or as I said, all my non-Jewish audiences, really, countless people all over the country who still welcome and hospitable and celebrate. We are now in this country a multicultural country. Jonathan's a hero in this, and you can find in both the Christian and the Muslim communities, it's not easy, but plenty of ways in which actually to celebrate the heterogeneity of British culture. And I think that's true in other countries as well.
One thing has become absolutely clear, and we have to say it loudly, that if it is no longer safe to be a Jew in the streets of Europe, then it is no longer safe to be a European in the streets of Europe. Yeah. We have to stand and fight. Were Jews to leave Europe, this is exactly what our enemies want. Yeah. It is exactly what they're trying to achieve. They know that if Jews remain in a country, they are the strongest and ultimate defenders of freedom
and toleration.
Yeah. And they are always in the forefront. And I have to tell you, knowing what I do about the other minority communities in Britain, it is that non-Jews know that we have brought something to Britain and to Europe, and they look to us for courage in the face of this terror. I really think so. I think in the fullness of time, the world will look at Israel's courage in facing up to terror, whatever issues we may have. At the end of the day, Israel has refused to be intimidated after 67 years of relentless assault on its right to be. So the fact is that whether in Israel or in Europe, we stand and fight, and we will discover that though Jews do have enemies, we have many and extremely good friends as well. And if we stand together and defend freedom together, we win.
Yeah, I think both, we're not, yes.
Shalom bimloma, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imanu v'imnu Shalom bimroma, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'akol Yisrael, ve'akol Yisrael, ve'imanu, amen. Yes. Shalom, shalom, bimroma. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'akol Yisrael, ve'akol Yisrael, ve'imanu, amen.
I may just end with the story because it was a bit tiny, as bit gloomy at times. Let me end with a story that I learned from some young Muslim children in the East End of London. You know, where my father came from, your father, they were both in the Shmata business,
Yeah,
right?
sure, man.
And I'm sure they knew one another. They probably played bridge together or something, and smoked salmon together. One way or another, that whole area now, Brick Lane, Shoreditch, is almost entirely Bangladeshi Muslim. And a Jewish couple decided in one of the streets there in the East End, 19 Princelet Street, which was originally a Huguenot chapel and then became a shul, and has been lying desolate for several decades, created in there a museum of immigration that told the story of Jewish immigrants and Irish immigrants. And these Muslim kids go to the museum and they immediately identify with the Jewish story and the Irish story, and they see they are part of the same story. And these 6- and 7-year-old Muslim kids, at the end of their visit, were taught a little Jewish play, which I saw them play out. I saw a video of them actually telling the story. So here is the story as told by 7-year-old Muslim children from the East End, where our families came from. And these Muslim kids told the following story. They said, once a Jew came, a small trader with his horse and cart and his goods, to a little town in Eastern Europe, where the people were so anti-Semitic that no Jews had ever gone there before. But this Jew decided he was going to go to this town. He arrives at the town, and the entire town population come out and shout, "Jew, Jew," expecting him to disappear into the distance. Instead, he comes down with a beatific smile on his face and says, "Thank you so much for that wonderful welcome. I have never had such a beautiful welcome before in my life." And he takes out his little money bag and takes out 5 gold rubles and gives one to each of the men who are shouting, "Jew, Jew." Well, they're a bit astonished at all of this, but still 5 rubles is 5 rubles. So they go away mystified, but at least interested. The next morning, they surround this man's house and start shouting, "Jew, Jew," again. And again, he comes out with a huge smile on his face and says, "Thank you for another beautiful welcome." And he gets out his wallet and says, "Well, you know, I can give each of you 1 ruble today, but you've made me so welcome. I can't thank you enough, and please accept a ruble." So they accept a ruble as a ruble and they go off. The next day, they come round shouting again, "Jew, Jew." And he comes out with the same smile and opens his wallet and says, "I'm afraid I don't have much money left. I can only give you today 10 kopecks each." And the people look at him scandalized. And they say, "For a mere lousy 10 kopecks, you expect us to shout, 'Jew, Jew' to you?"
Very good.
And they never shouted Jew again.
Very
Now,
good.
if young Muslim children can make that their story, which is our story, then we will find a world in which neither Jews nor Muslims are abused again. Let us hope that the lights of Hanukkah will light up a very dark.
I got one second.
Ladies and gentlemen, our initial short tribute is at an end. I'd like to thank Joel and Vicky very much for their efforts in assembling the material, and to thank Joel and various others for the idea that we should spend a little bit of time in thought at the moment, with the view to future appropriate events, of course. And just to let you know, the United Synagogue has just announced a major memorial event for this Thursday evening at 8 p.m. Details to be circulated. That's being run by the United Synagogue. Our Richard Verber is deeply involved in that, and he will circulate details as they become available. But do reserve the time. Vicky and I certainly plan to attend. And I think there will be other people involved in Dunstan Road, possibly Hadassah, who will be contributors. So do join us then. Shavua Tov, have a good week, and hope to see you very good soon on happy occasions.